Welcome to another episode of the Interventions Podcast. As you probably know by now, an intervention is basically you sitting across the table from you, asking yourself hard questions and looking for answers that seat you at the center of the answer, not the folks around you, your mama, your papa, your sister, your brother, your boss, where you intervene on your own behalf to get the answers that you need, where you examine yourself, right? That's what we do here. And I haven't talked about self care since May of 2022. Where the hell have I been? Uh, that episode was episode 6, self care part 2. What's God got to do with it? And for some reason, that is the most listened to episode of this entire podcast. It makes up at least 80% of the listens. And this is internationally. I don't know what happened to cause people to find themselves listening to that episode the most, but it makes me happy because at this point, it's the one that I'm most proud of because I was probably the most open and transparent about what I believe about God, what I believe about religion, and it may not be what you think. I don't consider myself a religious person, but I do believe understanding where you stand spiritually, whether it involves God or not, whether it involves religious practice or not, is an important part of your self-care. So yeah, that was episode 6 back in May 2022. And I will absolutely provide a link to that episode down in the description under this episode. Welcome to Self-Care Part 3. War, Retreat, and Surrender. Why did I call it that? So excuse me, I'm nursing a little bit of a cold today. It is just over a week from Christmas in New England. So it's been cold and then it suddenly got warm. My body rebelled and said, here's a little cold to let you know I don't like that. So excuse me, I'm a little nasally. So you know me, I don't like to beat around the bush. I like to get to the point and then unpack it. I don't like to create, suspense when it comes to my podcast. So what do I mean by self-care part 3, war, retreat, and surrender? So let's start with the ending and then we'll jump back to the beginning in a second. Here's my ending point. Here's my ending position. Your ability to fight, battle, be at war with someone or something out there, in here, whatever, is not a superpower. Not the way people talk about it and high five themselves for always being able to fight for something, right? It's not a superpower. It's a necessary skill, which is reserved for, the rare occasion when it's needed to save your life, whether that's physically, mentally, or emotionally. It's that physical, mental, and emotional fortitude that you need to actually be at war when it's appropriate. Your true superpower, ladies and gentlemen, is your ability to cultivate peace in a world, believe me, that is full of opportunities, presents plenty of opportunities for chaos, right? Being able to cultivate peace in your life and even in the space around you when chaos is always an option, okay? And only a whole healthy person with more than just beginner level of self-mastery can actually do that. And we're getting to the point of why this is falling under self-care. Because I believe that knowing when to war, when to retreat, and when to surrender involves self-mastery and therefore falls under self-care. So, anytime I do an episode on self-care, I'm going to define it. So here we are. Here's my personal definition of self-care, and it may differ from any way that you've heard anyone say it before. But I believe self-care is 100% responsibility and accountability for everything that comes in through your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, your skin, and yes, ma'am, ladies, even through your womb. Okay? Things that you let in through your womb. And it's also the same 100% responsibility and accountability for what comes out of you through your mouth, through your actions, and guess what, ladies? Also through your womb. So yes, choosing to bring children into the world and the timing of that too is also associated with your self-care. And I'm not just going to pick on the ladies, because gentlemen, reproductive choices are also a part of your self-care. So even though women get to choose when they have children, which is something that comes out of their bodies, So does your sperm. Let's not forget that. And where you leave your seed is also an important part of your self care. You don't escape this. You're a part of this as well. Okay? And if you want to hear more about, the basis of my definition for self care, you can go way back to what episode was it of the podcast? Let me find it. Self Care Part 1, Episode 2 from April 2022. I will also link that in the description under this episode. So, why is knowing when to war, retreat, and surrender a key part of your self care? Because the things, as I said before, choosing to fight or be at battle or to be at war with something should happen on special occasions, right? Some of you are constantly at war, whether it's with your family, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with a political party. And we almost congratulate each other for that, right? Like there's a badge of honor associated with always fighting for something. But the truth is, your health, your mental, emotional, and physical health are not made better by always being at war with something. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We all understand about fight or flight and how that response affects the body in terms of stress. And the truth is, to be at war with something or to always be battling with something is a form of stress. It releases cortisol in your body, which affects you physically, mentally, and emotionally. It's actually one of the foundations of disease in the body. Disease and dis-ease, right? So if you find yourself constantly being in a battle with something, you are out of the bounds of self-care. Completely out of the bounds of self-care. And the reason why healing through the proper application of self-care is so essential, because here's a perfect example of how being at war with something constantly is extremely detrimental to your life. Some of y'all are out here wearing badges of honor because you're fighting for love and fighting for your relationship, right? I hear this so much I had to use it as the example. And don't we applaud men and women who say things like that? Oh, it's noble. Look at him out here fighting for his relationship. That's beautiful. Look at her out here fighting for love. You go, sis. Well, I'm going to need y'all to stop. Stop patting people on the back for that bullshit, because it's not good. In fact, I'm about to offend somebody and I really don't care. But if you call yourselves out here in these streets fighting for a relationship, 50 to 100% of y'all, a number in between there, are doing that as a trauma response to things that happened to you when you were children, at the point you were taught that love is associated with pain. Because if you had a healthy relationship with love and with yourself, you would be able to equate love with peace, not war, not battling, not fighting. Love is associated with peace. So all of you out here, sitting under that nobility of fighting for love and fighting for my relationship, I need you to know I see you. I don't care how many people around you are applauding you for fighting for love and for fighting to be in relationship. This is why you need to know when to fight, retreat, and surrender. Because I'm telling you right now, if you're fighting for a relationship, you need to retreat, go lick your wounds in a corner, and then surrender to the fact that that's not an act of love. Because love comes with peace, not pain. And I find this to be one of the most unfortunate examples of when to understand to fight, retreat, and surrender. Because associating love with pain is really something that's installed before you're 7 years old. Because, between the ages of 0 and 7, or 1 and 7, is when you're the most impressionable. That's where you develop your personality. That's where your ego learns how to protect you. And it starts to make important associations that you carry with you throughout your entire life. If you don't take the time to see that you've picked up some of the bullshit and short circuit that stuff in your life. And if you came from a home where you were not seen, you were not heard, you were not nurtured by the parents that you hoped would love you, that you expected to love and nurture you, whether it's because they were in the home and incapable of providing it, or whether it was because they were absent, there was a point at which you began to associate love with pain. And unfortunately, if you carried that with you into your adulthood, when you're out here running the streets in romantic relationships, you call yourself fighting for love and patting yourself on the back because that script is running under the surface. Because you don't understand that peace is the most beautiful part of love. You haven't learned when to be at war, when to retreat, and when to surrender. So you're always at war because that's the thing that feels the most noble. I came up in a home that was full of that kind of pain. My parents were always at odds. And when I say at odds, that's probably the nicest word that I could use to describe what I experienced. Okay. They were at war. All right. There was physical and verbal violence in my home forever. That's the only kind of relationship that I've seen exist in my home. And it's funny because as much as you may hate an experience like that, if the script is running under the surface, you will absolutely recreate that in your adult life. Because I waited until I was, 36 years old and ended up in a violent relationship with someone who turned out to be a violent alcoholic. It was shortly after that that I started to do intentional work because I saw the pattern at play. And I said, oh, we're going to short circuit this bullshit. Because I called myself fighting to help him. It wasn't my job. Find somebody else to do it. This is above my pay grade. Get me out of here. And when I made that decision, it was permanent. I didn't do one of those, that's a shame, I've abandoned someone. I didn't do that. Nope. I never looked back. And no kidding, I think I cried for about, let me think about it. I think I cried for like 3.5 minutes, honey. And when I dried those eyes, there was no more. And when you don't understand when to be at war, when to retreat, when to surrender, it takes a lot to get back to right. It takes a lot to get back to normal. Because even though I cried like 3.5 minutes about that relationship that I was at war with, I was at war with myself at the same time, but that's another story. I had PTSD for quite a while. Like, it was hard for me to sleep because I wanted to lock the door. And I had nightmares. It took years to get past that part. All because I'm at war for love, at war to help someone else, in a constant battle. That takes a toll. And even though I'm using this as an example, it's not even just about relationships. Some of you are at war with your boss at work, and you really don't know how to extricate yourself from that. You haven't sat and had an intervention and asked yourself, why am I actually at war with my boss? Is it my boss? Is it me? Am I just dissatisfied with this job? Does this boss remind me of someone from my past that I didn't like? But you're at constant war. And you find yourself being unable to retreat or surrender. Because there's peace in retreating and there's peace in surrendering. Like I said, war is only for situations where your life is at stake. If you are in an abusive relationship, you might have to fight your way out of that. But that fight is temporary. But the fight to stay in it is forever. Think about that. The things that you're fighting with in your life right now, if you learned the art of retreat or surrender, you could experience peace. But you haven't mastered yourself enough, mentally or emotionally, to consider how to cultivate that peace, how to achieve that peace, because you see so much nobility in the fight. Stop fighting. Baby, it's ruining your health. It's probably ruining your skin. Take a look at your skin in the mirror. You're always fighting for something. It's probably affecting your body in all kinds of ways. You're probably not sleeping well. You're not eating well. You don't know how to experience calm when there's a storm. Stop fighting. Learn to not be at war. Learn when to retreat and when to surrender. And what's the difference in retreat and surrender, right? Because this episode is about 3 parts. It's called War, Retreat, and Surrender. So we know what war looks like. But what's the difference in retreat and surrender? Well, here's the difference. Sometimes you have to know when to back off of something, which is different than surrendering to it. So backing off is retreating. Leaving that unhealthy relationship, that's retreating. Back it up, turn on the backup camera, and ease your way on out of there, okay? But what's surrender? I believe surrender to be the most challenging choice, because surrender occurs when you find out you're the architect of your own suffering, which, by the way, I just talked about. I actually have an episode called Are You the Architect of Your Own Suffering? Some of you are. And if you are suffering at something right now, most of you are. You're the architect of that suffering. Because as a grown sovereign adult, suffering is a choice. And to surrender is to look around and understand, oh, am I the problem? Because sometimes you are. That level of accountability is the most challenging part of adulting to accept. You're accountable for the outcomes of the choices in your life. And to surrender is to begin to understand that there's peace in front of surrendering. Or I should say behind surrendering. There is peace behind surrendering. Once you reach that level of accountability, mama, there's a peace beyond understanding. And you have to ask me how I know. If you follow my podcast long enough, you'll learn layer by layer how surrender is one of the most beautiful choices I've made in life when it comes to looking around and understanding how I am the architect of the way my life is going. There are so many things I had to surrender to. I remember, because if you follow me on social media, you also know I consider myself a matriarch of generational blessings, because my mother and I had a deeply challenging relationship that was the unfortunate collateral damage of generational chaos, which some people call generational curses. I don't believe it's a curse. Even that's a choice. So I'll call it anything but. I'll call it generational chaos. I'll call it generational patterns. I'll call it generational madness, but not a curse, because it's not a curse. It's a choice. You have to participate for it to operate, okay? But we were the unfortunate collateral damage of that. But what I also found out was that even in all of my well-wishing and proper motivations, there was a point in my life where I was also replicating the patterns in ways that were foreign to me. I didn't see it. It was sitting in my blind spots. But oh boy, if you have children, you know how children are. Ooh, that dress look ugly on you. Children are honest. And I especially have one very rambunctious, honest one who will tell me like it is. And since reaching the age of near adulthood, has been honest with me about how I have performed over the years at times as a mother, and how some of the patterns that I picked up in my childhood were showing up in the way I was mothering. I had to surrender to that. Because, yeah, the first thing you want to do is defend yourself, because there was no malintent behind missing the mark as a mother at times. But that's not what a mother hears when you hear you failed at something. Now, in all of the years of doing intentional work, believe me, a corner has been turned. It's wonderful. But I had to surrender to reach that level of peace. I had to surrender to become a matriarch of generational blessings. What if I didn't surrender to what I was hearing? What if I wanted to be at war with it? I'm not going to be spoken of this way. That's not the kind of mother I saw myself as. That's not what I was intending to do. Maybe you're ungrateful, right? I could have been at war with that for years and stayed at war with it and let the unfortunate sacrifice be the relationship with my own children. But many, many years ago, I surrendered to that. I surrendered to accountability for what I was creating. And I promise you, when you surrender, you start seeing all kinds of little stuff in the shadows that you didn't see before. When you decide you are prepared to take radical accountability for the things that you create in life, you start to see who is it? Is it Taylor Swift has a song? Like something like, okay, it's me. Like I'm the problem. That level of accountability is a challenge because you almost have to start out swinging the pendulum all the way the other way. You have to say, everything that occurs in my life is my fault and unpack it from there. You have to get real radical with it because believe me, when you start doing that, when you start taking that level of responsibility, because in the other episode about self-care, is it that one? I'll have to link this one too. There's one of my podcast episodes where I talk about the difference in responsibility and accountability. And yes, it's self-care part 1. I'll link that down in the description. I talk about the difference in responsibility and accountability because they are different. You know, we kind of use them interchangeably, but they're not. In short, I see responsibility is something that you take up front, and accountability is what you take after something plays out. So you take responsibility for something up front, and then at the end of it, when the results come out, you're taking accountability for the results. Okay? That's in short. But I promise you, when you start this journey of taking accountability, teaching yourself when to be at war, when to retreat, and when to surrender, and you say, everything is my fault. Everything that I've created in my life is my fault, and unpack it from there. There may be some things that you find that someone else was the culprit, but I promise you this, more often than not, you really are going to find your own bullshit wrapped up in the shadows. Your choices wrapped up in the shadows, speaking to you from the shadows in whispers that you didn't hear before. You just didn't hear it. You didn't see it. You weren't looking for it. And taking that level of radical accountability for the outcomes in your life is a challenging thing to do because you don't want to be seen as guilty or not nice or faulty, because what are we taught as children? If you have a need, or if you're seen too much, or if you do something wrong, you're no longer worthy of love. And I think that's a script that runs under the surface for many of us. And it keeps us from surrender to the idea that we're accountable for our outcomes. Now, retreat, on the other hand, retreat's easier, right? Retreat has nothing to do with responsibility and accountability. Retreat is just about, I've been at war with something for far too long. And I know that war is not good for me. To be constantly in a state of stress over anyone or anything is just not good for me. And for me to commit this radical act of self-care today would be to just back away from it and retreat. Switch gears to something that's healthier for me, that puts me on a road to peace as opposed to war. That's easier. Now, I should say it's simpler because it's not easy. Because what do most people think when they think of retreating from something? You're a quitter. The first thing, you're quitting? You're such a quitter. We need to normalize congratulating people for knowing when to retreat, for when to change gears, for when to course correct, and get on a road that leads back to peace. Some of you are in school pursuing degrees that you don't even want. Lord have mercy. If you changed right now, that's a retreat. That's a healthy retreat. That's not quitting. And you know what else it's doing? It's getting you out of the war with yourself. Because if you're pursuing something you really don't want to do, Yes, ma'am. You are at war. You're in a battle with yourself. You're in a battle with your day. You are in a battle with that choice. And it's not quitting to retreat. Because what's today's lesson? Self-care part 3, war, retreat, and surrender. You know me. I just want to ask the question and leave you to the answers. I don't want to talk your ear off about it. But when you go away from this episode today, that's what I want you to do. I want you to go find a comfortable chair. Get your favorite soft blanket. I have one. Child, that thing is so plush and lovely. But go sit in the corner. Get some tea. Shit, get some whiskey. And ask yourself, what am I at war with right now? It could be anything. You could be at war with your kids. Come on. What are you at war with today? And then ask yourself the next important question. Do I need to retreat or surrender? Do I need to retreat or surrender? Do I need to declare a peace treaty and retreat because this is a war I should not be in? Or do I need to surrender to the possibility that I'm not holding myself accountable for this situation? Do I need to retreat or surrender to find peace with this thing that I'm at war with? That's your intervention for today. That's your big question for today. What am I at war with? Because remember what I said at the beginning, which was really my conclusion at the end? Your superpower is not your ability to fight for something. Stop letting people sit on the sidelines and talk you into getting bloody over some shit you don't need to be involved in. Okay? Your actual superpower is knowing how to create and cultivate peace in a world where chaos is always an option. Okay? Your superpower is finding the peace that allows your mind and your body to finally be at rest and out of a state of stress over whatever it is, because you figured out when to retreat and when to surrender, and to only be at war when you need to be. And I guarantee, if you're at war with 10 things in your life right now, only 0 to 1 of them are probably something you should be at war with. Otherwise, you need to sit and consider where you should retreat and where you should surrender. Okay, that's the intervention for today. That's your homework. As always, you can find me at howabond.com. You can find the podcast there, but you can also find me wherever your favorite, portal is to listen to podcasts. Spotify, Apple Music, it's all over. We're there. Deezer, it's there. Find me. But if you go to howabond.com, you can also leave feedback on this particular episode. If I get up off my butt and get the form updated, but please do stop by. And if you see me on social media, which if you're on Facebook, you see me just about every day, stop in. I typically post the podcasts. Start a conversation in the comments. You can also find me at the Howabond Interventions page on Facebook. That page has been pretty dead for a little bit now, but I've decided I need to resurrect that page and really begin to engage with you as my community, because listen, I was sitting in my room this morning thinking about you guys. And I'm talking about the world of people out there who may need this message. Okay? It's so important with me at this point to connect with you and to see people healing by having their own personal and private interventions, asking themselves hard questions. And as a result, I also want to hear from you. Okay? I want to see someone blessed by the word as it is given. All right? Have a beautiful day. And guess what? As always, I'll see you next time.